And that, kids, is how I met your father, Xylop concluded, her tentacles waving dramatically as she finished her tale. Her offspring stared at her, their eye stalks twitching in disbelief. The eldest, Blorp, was the first to break the silence. Mom, that story made absolutely no sense. How does getting stuck in a black hole's event horizon lead to you meeting Dad at an intergalactic coffee shop? Xylop's skin flickered through a kaleidoscope of colors, the Exorbian equivalent of a shrug. Time dilation, sweetie. You'll understand when you're older. Just then, a thunderous rumble shook the family's dwelling pod, causing the walls to vibrate and the decorative plasma orbs to flicker ominously. Oh no, groaned Xylop. Your father's asleep again. As if on cue, a seismic snore ripped through the air, this time accompanied by a faint, high-pitched whine that slowly increased in volume. Everyone, emergency positions, Xylop shouted, her usual sarcasm replaced by genuine panic. The young Zorbians scattered, each racing to their designated safety spots. Blorp dove into the gelatinous cushions of the relaxation nook, while the twins, Gloop and Bleep, rolled themselves into tight balls and wedged themselves into the ventilation shafts. Xylop herself made a beeline for the kitchen, yanking open a cabinet and pulling out what looked like a misshapen colander made of an iridescent metal. She jammed it onto her head, making sure her eye stalks were securely tucked inside. Just as she got the helmet in place, the high-pitched whine reached a crescendo, and suddenly, every piece of technology in the dwelling pod went haywire. The holoscreens flickered to life, cycling through channels faster than the eye could follow. The food synthesizer started spewing out a gelatinous goo that bore an unsettling resemblance to what the Exorbians considered haute cuisine. Even the cleaning drones awoke from their charging stations, whirring about in a frenzy and bumping into walls like drunken insects at a bug zapper convention. And through it all, the snoring continued, each earth-shattering rumble punctuated by brief moments of terrifying silence before the next one hit. That's it, Xylop declared, her voice muffled by the helmet. I'm calling the Galactic Noise Control Agency. She slithered over to the communication panel, her tentacles dancing across the controls with practiced ease. After a few moments of static, and what sounded suspiciously like hold music from the Andromeda Galaxy's top 40 chart, a gruff voice answered, Galactic Noise Control, this is Agent Kara Keck speaking. How may I direct your complaint? Xylop's voice dripped with sarcasm as she replied, Oh, I don't know. Maybe to the department of my husband's snoring is literally tearing apart the fabric of spacetime. Or perhaps help, I'm trapped in a sitcom about interspecies marriage and I can't get out. There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by what could only be described as an exasperated sigh. Is this about the human again? No. It's about the other species in the galaxy capable of producing sounds that violate the laws of physics. Of course it's about the human. Agent Crokex's voice took on a tone of forced patience. We've been over this. Your husband's condition is a matter of galactic security. We can't simply make him stop snoring as you've requested in your previous 17 complaints. Xylop's skin turned a deep shade of indigo, a clear sign of frustration for her species. Oh, so it's fine for the government to use my husband as some sort of sonic weapon, but heaven forbid they help a poor Zorbian get a good night's sleep. I assure you, the Galactic Coalition takes the comfort and well-being of all its citizens very seriously. Have you tried the noise-cancelling earplugs we sent after your last complaint? Another window-rattling snore punctuated the conversation, causing one of the plasma orbs to explode in a shower of sparks. Earplugs, Xylop screeched. Your solution to snoring that can be heard across star systems is earplugs. Why don't you just suggest I stuff my auditory receptors with space algae and hope for the best? Actually, ma'am, studies have shown that Rigelian space algae has remarkable sound-absorbing properties. It was a joke, Xylop interrupted. For the love of all that's holy in this chaotic universe, don't you have any sense of humor in that bureaucratic hive mind of yours? There was another pause, longer this time. When Agent Karkak spoke again, his voice had lost some of its professional detachment. Look, Mrs. Xylop, was it? I get it. I really do. I'm married to a Thessalonian myself. Do you have any idea what it's like trying to sleep next to someone who emits gamma radiation when they dream? Despite herself, Xylop felt a twinge of sympathy. That sounds challenging. Challenging? I have to wear a lead-lined sleeping bag. But you know what? We make it work. Because that's what you do when you love someone, even if they're from a species that's fundamentally incompatible with your own biology. Xylop's tentacles drooped slightly. I suppose you're right. It's not easy, you know. When we first met, I thought the snoring was cute, exotic even. But now you're wondering if love really can conquer all, including potential violations of the space-time continuum. Agent Croquex finished for her. Exactly, Zyglop exclaimed. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love the big lug. But sometimes I wonder if I've made a terrible mistake. Like universe-ending levels of mistake. Agent Croquex's voice softened further. Mrs. Xylop, if I may speak frankly, what you and your husband have is special, rare. Do you know how many interspecies couples there are in the galaxy where one partner's biological functions don't cause the other extreme discomfort or potential death? Not many, exactly. The fact that you can even cohabitate without one of you dissolving, exploding, or being crushed by gravitational differences is nothing short of a miracle. The snoring, that's just, well, let's call it the cherry on top of the cosmic sundae. Xylop couldn't help but laugh, a sound reminiscent of bubbles popping in a tar pit. I suppose when you put it that way, it does sound rather silly to complain. That's the spirit. Agent Carcax enthused. Now, I can't officially do anything about the snoring situation, but off the record. Have you considered a white noise machine? I hear the sounds of a supernova collapsing can be quite soothing. I'll give it a try, Xylop said, her mood considerably lighter. Thank you, Agent Corkex. You've been surprisingly helpful for a soulless government drone. And you've been surprisingly reasonable for a hysterical civilian. Corkex retorted, a hint of amusement in his voice. Take care, Mrs. Xylop, and remember, if the snoring ever does tear a hole in reality, well, you know who to call. As the communication ended, Xylop turned to face her dwelling, which looked like it had been hit by a localized hurricane. The snoring had subsided, leaving an almost eerie quiet in its wake. Kids, she called out, you can come out now. The sonic apocalypse has passed. One by one, her offspring emerged from their hiding spots. Blorp oozed out from between the cushions, looking slightly flattened. The twins unrolled themselves from the ventilation shafts, their eye stalks spinning dizzily. Is it over? Mom Bleep asked, her voice quivering. Xylop smiled, or at least performed the Zorbian equivalent, which involved rippling her skin in a particularly pleasing pattern. For now, sweetie. For now. Just then, a new sound filled the air. It wasn't the earth-shattering snore they'd all come to fear, but something altogether different. A sound that, to most species in the galaxy, would be utterly unremarkable. But to this little family, it was the sweetest music imaginable. Footsteps. Human footsteps. A moment later, a sleepy-eyed human man shuffled into the room, looking bewildered at the state of disarray. Honey, he mumbled, running a hand through his disheveled hair. Did I miss something? Xylop glided over to him, wrapping her tentacles around him in a loving embrace. Oh, nothing much, dear. Just another typical night in the Johnson-Xylop household. As her husband hugged her back, still blissfully unaware of the chaos his slumber had caused, Xylop couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, Agent Carkex was right. This was special, rare, and worth every moment of cosmic insanity. Meanwhile, in a top-secret facility deep beneath the surface of a nondescript moon orbiting a gas giant in the Orion Arm, a group of beings from various species huddled around a holographic display. The room hummed with an air of anticipation and not a small amount of fear. At the center of the group stood Admiral Krog, a grizzled veteran of the Galactic Defense Force. His exoskeleton bore the scars of countless battles, and his compound eyes had seen horrors that would drive lesser beings mad. But nothing in his long and illustrious career had prepared him for this. To play it again, he ordered, his mandibles clicking nervously. A young ensign, her scales shimmering with anxiety, tapped a series of commands into the console. The holographic display flickered to life, showing a vast star field. For a moment, all was calm. Then, without warning, a shockwave rippled through space, distorting the very fabric of reality. By the great hive, someone whispered. It's getting stronger. Admiral Krog's antennae twitched in agreement. Indeed, the human's power grows with each sleep cycle, if we don't find a way to harness it soon. He left the sentence unfinished, but everyone in the room knew what was at stake. The very fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, all because of one human's ability to snore with the force of 1,000 supernovas. So the ensign spoke up, her voice quavering. There's something else you should see. With visible reluctance, she manipulated the controls once more. The holographic display zoomed in on a particular sector of space, one that had been empty in previous recordings. Now, however, impossible, Krog breathed. Where once there had been nothing but the cold emptiness of space, a swirling vortex of energy now pulsed and writhed. It was as if someone had torn a hole in the universe itself, creating a gateway to somewhere else. Is that one of the scientists began, unable to finish the thought. Admiral Krog nodded grimly. A wormhole. The human snoring has created a stable wormhole. The room erupted into a cacophony of exclamations, questions, and not a few terrified whimpers. Krog raised all four of his arms, calling for silence. I know what you're all thinking, he said once the noise had died down. And yes, this changes everything. If we can learn to control this power, we could revolutionize space travel. The ensign finished, her earlier fear replaced by a glimmer of excitement. Or tear the universe apart, countered one of the older scientists, his tentacles waving in agitation. Krog clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. Both possibilities are on the table, which is why our next steps are crucial. We need to bring the human in. A collective gasp went up from the assembled beings, but so protested the ensign. What about the Azorbian? His mate? We can't just. We can, and we will, Krog interrupted. The security of the galaxy takes precedence over one family's domestic bliss. Besides, he added, his compound eyes glinting with what might have been amusement, we might be doing her a favor. As the group dispersed to carry out their new orders, Admiral Krog remained behind, staring at the holographic image of the wormhole. In all his years of service, he'd never encountered anything like this. A human, of all species, holding the key to unimaginable power, and all because of something as mundane as snoring. The universe, Krog mused, had a strange sense of humor indeed. Back in the Johnson-Zig-Silop household, blissfully unaware of the cosmic drama unfolding around them, life had settled into what passed for normalcy in an interspecies family. Zyglop was in the kitchen, her tentacles a blur of motion as she prepared breakfast. The food synthesizer, still recovering from its earlier malfunction, sputtered and wheezed as it struggled to produce something edible. Oh, come on, you glorified replicator, Zyglop muttered, giving the machine a solid whack with one of her appendages. Is it too much to ask for a simple plate of fried Norbax eggs and a side of photon toast? As if in response, the synthesizer let out a pitiful beep and extruded a gelatinous mass that bore an unsettling resemblance to the primordial ooze from which life first emerged. Zig-Zylops sighed. I suppose it's cold cereal again. How very human. Speaking of humans, her husband chose that moment to enter the kitchen, looking far more refreshed than someone who had nearly torn apart the fabric of space-time had any right to be. Morning, honey, he said, planting a kiss on what approximated Zygylop's cheek. Sleep well. Zig-Zylop's skin rippled in a pattern that, to those familiar with Zorbian expressions, clearly said, Are you kidding me right now? But what came out of her mouth was a cheerful, oh, like a nebula in a gravity well, dear. Like a log, he replied, oblivious to the irony. Though I had the strangest dream. I was floating in space, and every time I breathed out, stars were born. Weird, her. Positively bizarre, Zylop agreed, her tone drier than the deserts of Arrakis. I can't imagine where your subconscious came up with that one. Her husband laughed, the sound sending a shiver through Zyglop that was equal parts affection and residual terror. You Zorbians and your sarcasm. It's what I love about you, you know. And here I thought it was my scintillating conversation and stunning good looks, Zig-Zylop retorted, but there was genuine warmth in her voice. Just then, a commotion from the living area drew their attention. The children had awoken, and from the sounds of it, were engaged in their usual morning ritual of bickering, blobbing, and general chaos. I'll handle it, Zig-Zylop's husband said, giving her another quick peck. You finish up with breakfast. Or, whatever that is, he added, eyeing the synthesizer's latest creation with a mix of curiosity and mild horror. As he left the kitchen, Zig-Zylop allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. Yes, life for the human was challenging. Yes, there were nights when she seriously considered stealing a spaceship and heading for the farthest reaches of the galaxy. But then there were moments like this, simple, domestic, and utterly perfect in their own weird way. Her reverie was interrupted by a sudden, sharp knock at the door. Not the front door, mind you, the one that normal, law-abiding citizens of the galaxy used. No, this knock came from the emergency airlock, a feature that every home in this sector was required to have, ostensibly for safety reasons, but more likely because the Galactic Housing Authority had a vested interest in the airlock manufacturing industry. Xylop's eye stalks swiveled towards the source of the noise, a feeling of dread settling in her gelatinous core. "Oh, quasar nuggets," she muttered. "This can't be good." With a resigned sigh, she slithered over to the airlock and pressed her tentacle against the bioscanner. The door hissed open, revealing a sight that made Xylop wish she had followed through on that whole stealing a spaceship plan. Standing, or more accurately, hovering before her, was a contingent of Galactic Defense Force officers. Their exoskeletons gleamed in the artificial light of the habitat ring, and their compound eyes reflected Xylop's own startled expression back at her 1,000 times over. At the forefront of the group was a particularly grizzled-looking officer, his carapace bearing the insignia of an admiral. His mandibles clicked in what Xylop assumed was meant to be a reassuring manner, but came across more like the sound of impending doom. "Good morning, citizen," the admiral said, his voice a gravelly rumble that seemed to vibrate the very air around them. "I am Admiral Krog of the Galactic Defense Force. We're here to speak with your husband." Xylop's skin cycled through a rapid series of colors before settling on a sickly green. "I'm sorry, but I think you must have the wrong habitat unit. My husband is just a simple human. He doesn't have anything to do with the Defense Force." Admiral Krog's antennae twitched in what might have been amusement. "Oh, I assure you, Mrs. Zygop, we have the right unit. Your husband may be just a simple human to you, but to us, he represents the greatest potential weapon the galaxy has ever known." "Weapons," Xylop repeated, her voice rising to a pitch that would have shattered glass had their windows not been made of transparent aluminum. "My Herbert? A weapon? The man can barely operate the food synthesizer without causing a minor explosion." As if on cue, a muffled boom echoed from the kitchen, followed by Herbert's sheepish voice calling out, Honey? We might need to order out for breakfast, and possibly a new kitchen." Admiral Krog's mandibles clicked rapidly, the insectoid equivalent of raising an eyebrow. "I see your point, Mrs. Xylop. Nevertheless, we must insist on speaking with him. The fate of the galaxy may well depend on it." Xylop's tentacles writhed in agitation. "Oh, for the love of Herbert, could you come here for a moment and bring a towel? I have a feeling you're going to need it." A few moments later, Herbert appeared in the hallway, his hair singed and his face smeared with what looked suspiciously like the remains of the food synthesizer's latest culinary abomination. He was, as Xylop had predicted, clutching a towel. "What's up, honey?" "Who are our guests? Some kind of interstellar exterminators? Because I gotta say, after what just happened in the kitchen, we might need their services." Admiral Krog stepped forward, all four of his arms raised in what was probably meant to be a non-threatening gesture, but came across more like a particularly aggressive form of interpretive dance. "Mr. Johnson, I presume. I am Admiral Krog of the Galactic Defense Force. We need to talk about your ability." Herbert blinked, looking from the Admiral to his wife and back again. "My ability? Look, if this is about that time I tried to fix the quantum toaster, I swear I had no idea it would create a temporary singularity in the living room. The carpet's almost good as new now, see." "Not that ability," Mr. Johnson Krog said, his patience clearly wearing thin. "We're here about your snoring." There was a moment of stunned silence, broken only by the sound of Blorp and the twins giggling uncontrollably from their hiding spot behind the holoprojector. Herbert's face went through a series of expressions that would have been fascinating to watch under different circumstances. Confusion gave way to disbelief, which was quickly replaced by indignation. "My snoring? You've got to be kidding me. Xylop, is this some kind of elaborate prank? Did you put them up to this?" Xylop's skin had settled into a mottled pattern of exasperation and resignation. "I wish I had, dear. It would be less ridiculous than the reality we seem to be living in." Admiral Krog cleared his throat, a sound reminiscent of gravel in a blender. "Mr. Johnson, I assure you this is no joke. Your snoring has unique properties that could change the face of warfare as we know it." Herbert looked at the Admiral as if he'd just announced that he was secretly a tap-dancing Vorax beast from the swamps of Dagobah V. Right. My snoring, a weapon of mass destruction. Pull the other one, it's got bells on. Perhaps a demonstration is in order, Krog said, gesturing to one of his subordinates. The young officer stepped forward, producing a small device that looked like a cross between a remote control and a particularly angry sea urchin. With a few deft movements of his pincers, the officer activated the device. A holographic display sprang to life in the middle of the hallway, showing a vast star field. At first, nothing seemed to be happening. Then, without warning, a massive shockwave rippled through space, distorting stars and sending asteroids spinning off into the void. That, Admiral Krog said solemnly, is the effect of your last REM cycle on a sector of space approximately 3 light-years from here. Herbert stared at the display, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. But that's impossible. I'm just a guy. A normal, everyday guy who happens to be married to the most beautiful Zorbian in the galaxy. He paused, glancing at Zig Psylop. You are the most beautiful Zorbian in the galaxy, right? I mean, I assume so, but it's not like I've made a comprehensive study or anything. Zig Psylop patted her husband's arm with a tentacle. Yes, dear, I'm the Zorbian equivalent of a supermodel. Now perhaps we could focus on the fact that your nocturnal noises are apparently capable of reshaping the cosmos. Right, Herbert muttered, turning back to Admiral Krog. So, let's say for a moment that I believe this insanity. What exactly do you want from me? A recording of my snoring to use as some kind of sonic superweapon. Krog's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. Nothing so crude, Mr. Johnson. We want you to come with us to a secure facility where we can study your ability and learn to harness its power. Absolutely not, Zig Psylop interjected, her tentacles lashing out to wrap protectively around her husband. You can't just whisk him away to some secret lab. We have a life here, children to raise, a food synthesizer to repair again. Herbert nodded vigorously, then paused. Wait a minute. If my snoring is really that powerful, how come Zydlop and the kids aren't, I don't know, disintegrated or something every night? It was a good question, and one that made Admiral Krog shift uncomfortably. We're not entirely sure. It seems that your immediate surroundings are somehow shielded from the worst effects. It's one of the many things we hope to understand through our research. Research that you'll be conducting somewhere far, far away from here, I assume Zylop asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Krog nodded. For the safety of your family and, indeed, this entire sector, it would be best if Mr. Johnson came with us. Herbert looked from the Admiral to his wife, his face a mask of confusion and growing panic. I don't know what to say. This is all happening so fast. 1 minute I'm trying to make breakfast, the next I'm being told I'm some kind of cosmic threat. It's a lot to process. Zylop's expression softened. She unwrapped her tentacles from around Herbert and turned him to face her. Listen to me, you big, snoring lug. I didn't marry you because you were normal. I married you because you were extraordinary in all the ways that matter. If it turns out you're also extraordinary in ways that defy the laws of physics, well, that's just icing on the cake. Herbert's eyes misted over. So, you think I should go with them? I think, Zylop said slowly, that if there's even a chance your snoring could harm our family or anyone else, we have a responsibility to understand it. But, she added, turning to fix Admiral Krog with a glare that could have melted neutronium, I'm coming with you. Where my husband goes, I go, and the kids come too. Krog looked like he was about to object, but something in Zygzylop's gaze made him reconsider. I suppose we could arrange that. It would certainly make studying the shielding effect easier. Herbert took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and nodded. All right then. I guess we're going on a little family vacation too. Where exactly? A top-secret facility deep beneath the surface of a nondescript moon orbiting a gas giant in the Orion Arm. Krog replied matter-of-factly. Ah, Herbert said weakly. Lovely this time of year, I hear. And so, in a flurry of packing, explaining to confused children, and one last desperate attempt to fix the food synthesizer, which resulted in a small fire and what appeared to be a briefly sentient blob of pasta, the Johnson-Zygzylop family prepared for their journey into the unknown. As they boarded the sleek Galactic Defense Force shuttle, Herbert turned to Zylop, a wry smile on his face. You know, when you said for better or for worse in our wedding vows, I don't think either of us quite imagined this scenario. Zylop's skin rippled in the Zorbian equivalent of a chuckle. Oh, I don't know. I always had a feeling you'd rock my world. I just didn't realize you'd be doing it quite so literally. With that, the shuttle's doors sealed shut, and the unlikely family blasted off into space, leaving behind a confused neighborhood, a half-melted food synthesizer, and the distinct feeling that the universe would never quite be the same again. As the shuttle disappeared into the star-studded darkness, a lone figure watched from the shadows of a nearby asteroid. Agent Crarkex of the Galactic Noise Control Agency lowered his high-powered binoculars and spoke into his communicator. Central, this is Agent Crarkex. Operation Lullaby is underway. The package is in transit. I repeat, the snorer has left the building. A crackly voice responded, "Excellent work, Agent Crarkex. Continue monitoring the situation. And for the love of all that's holy, stop with the Earth idioms. You're embarrassing the entire agency." Crarkex sighed. "Roger that, Central." Crarkex out he paused, then couldn't resist adding, "Over and out. Hasta la vista, baby. I'll be back." The communicator went dead, but Crarkex could have sworn he heard the sound of a facepalm from the other end, just before the connection cut out. With a shrug, he settled in to wait. After all, in the game of galactic espionage, patience was more than a virtue, it was a necessity, especially when dealing with a weapon that could rewrite the laws of physics every time it hit the snooze button. To be continued. Perhaps in the dreams of a certain snoring human, where entire universes are born and die with each earth-shattering snore.